22nd episode of the Veritas fact-finding series, and I'm joined today by Dr. John Mighton. John, nice to have you.
Thanks so much. I'm really excited to talk to you.
We're back again live to go on the ground to speak to industry professionals in an unscripted, candid, live video format to discover how we can make better investment decisions. If you're watching and you like what you hear, give us a like and follow us at www.veritascorp.com. A quick disclaimer, this broadcast is not to be taken as investment advice, and participants or employees of the Veritas group of companies may own securities discussed in this broadcast. While we love all our guests, and John in particular, this session may contain forward-looking statements, investment opinions, and comments that we may not agree with at all. And I think that's going to be hard listening to John. But now I want to talk to you quickly about John. And I could go on for hours, because what's interesting about John Mighton is he's done just about everything. If I look at the crowning achievement, I'm gonna say he has his Order of Canada. He's published 3 books on math educations and given hundreds of talks on the subject of learning and specifically on math. He's an award-winning mathematician, playwright, best-selling author, internationally recognized for his groundbreaking work on children's confidence, skills, and success. And he's founded in 2022 a charity called Jump Math. And Jump is very interesting. It stands for Junior Undiscovered Math Prodigies. With that, John, I want to start out by asking you, I like to always ask my guests for them to tell us their background. Tell us about what they do, how they got into it, and most especially why they do what they do.
Well, I'm a mathematician now and I'm a playwright. But about 20 years ago, I founded a charity called Jump Math to help kids learn math. And I got there through a kind of a strange route. At university, I almost failed calculus. Um, I also got the lowest mark of my creative writing course. And I graduated not thinking I could really do much. And I learned in my 20s, I read poems by this poet, Sylvia Plath, and letters to her mother. And I realized she taught herself to write by sheer determination. She just memorized poems. She wrote imitations of poems. She trained herself as a poet. And in my 20s, that was the first time I actually realized that you could develop a talent for something where you apparently didn't have any talent. And so I imitated her poems and other poets, and I eventually ended up in theater, and I've had a pretty good career in theater. My plays have been done in about 9 countries, and I even acted in the movie Good Will Hunting.
Yeah, that's right.
But when I was in my teenage years, I really wasn't sure I would even get published. I had no confidence. And then I was tutoring kids to make a bit of money to supplement my playwriting income in my late 20s, and I thought I could start at a grade 6 level since I passed calculus barely, and I worked my way up. And going back over the math as an adult, a mature adult, student, things became clear to me that were just mysteries, like why does a negative times a negative equal a positive? All these things that are totally mysterious to kids. And I began to think I could do math. And what really changed my life, one of my first students was a remedial grade 6 student, and his mom was told that he could never learn math. He was just too challenged. Um, so now he's a fully tenured math professor. And and I began seeing these changes in kids if they just got the right teaching and support. And that actually gave me the confidence to go back and do math. And I eventually got a doctorate in my 30s. And when I was finishing my doctorate, I started Jump just as a tutoring club first, and then it grew from there.
Amazing, amazing. This concept of grit, I read a book by Angela Duckworth called The Power of Passion and Perseverance, and it's just called Grit. And she's a psychology PhD professor, and she did a whole study of what makes people successful. And she comes down to this word or this concept of grit. And so, on the call here, we have professional money managers, there's regulators, there's investment advisors, and we're going to talk about math. And what I think is going to be interesting about our discussion, and perhaps you could expand on this, is why is financial literacy so important at both a young age and later in life, and particularly in our industry?
Well, I think, it was clear from the financial crisis in the early 2000s that people really didn't have any idea of how interest rates work. If you're paying 1% interest and then it goes up to 2%, that might seem like a very small amount to most people, but you're actually doubling your payment, like from 1 to 2%. And so I think people were overextended. They had no idea what they were getting into with some of these crazy mortgages, and that led to a massive, recession around the world. And so I think our society really doesn't understand investment and understand risk, understand numbers, and really feels helpless. Um, there's studies showing that math predicts people's financial futures, what kind of jobs they'll get. But there's also, if you're interested, there's some really surprising studies coming out now around the importance of math that I think nobody's really aware of.
Yes.
So it turns out there's three huge studies showing that for young kids around a kindergarten age, math is actually a stronger predictor of success at school than reading. In fact, your achievement in math predicts how you're going to do in reading more strongly than your reading achievement does, which is really surprising to people. We know literacy is really important, and that's where a lot of investment is going, but math is actually, you got a bigger bang for your buck investing in math. And I just read some really alarming statistics recently. The Texas Educational Authority estimates that if kids don't have some kind of college certification, even if it's fairly low, within 6 years of graduating, they only have about a 12% chance of earning a living wage, which is shocking to me. I mean, and all these studies are showing that math is the number one predictor of whether you're going to get through college. 60% of kids going in, even in for a 2-year degree, need remediation in math. That's just even at a community college level. They don't even have grade 8 or 9 math. And here's the terrible thing, 70% of those kids fail that course.
Wow.
Which means so many kids are wasting money going into college because they can't get through the math course. And it's the same at university. The number one predictor of of graduating from university, the number one barrier, not just to STEM careers, but to all careers, is the math courses. So I think people don't really recognize how much money we're wasting and how many people are being excluded from getting good jobs and having even good health, because there's outcomes in math connected to health. Because of math, we know literacy is important, but we don't really have any idea of how important the math is.
Interesting. So what's different about Jump Math's approach to teaching? Because they've been teaching math since Christ was a little kid, and so but you have a different and unique way of doing it.
Yeah, and it's a bit of a hard question because there's a few things, but I think one of the first things is it's our belief that almost every child can learn math at a fairly high level. And maybe I wouldn't mind showing you the results of a study we did,
Sure, why don't you
if
do
that's
that?
okay. It was reported in the New York Times. The results are kind of pretty stunning. But this is a study we did in a. Can you see my screen? Okay.
Perfectly. Yep.
This is a study we did in a grade 5 class in Toronto, and this bell curve shows the distribution of marks. There are kids as low as the 9th percentile. That's why we cut off the bell curve there, and as high as the 75th percentile. And the average mark is in the 54th percentile. So that would represent about a 3-grade level difference between the bottom students and the top students as early as grade 5. And this is a very good private school where we did this study. And so, private schools generally do somewhat better in math, but they still have the same spreads. You can have very weak students and very strong students, even at a private school. And so this is pretty universal in every school I visited hundreds and hundreds of schools around the world. When we survey teachers, they say, yeah, we're seeing that difference between kids as early as grade 5. So what does that say about our attitudes as a society? And this is with your question, what's different? If people are willing to pay money to send their kids to a school where that's happening, what does it say about our attitudes? It means we don't really believe we can do better. Otherwise, you'd move your kids to a different school, or that there's always going to be, or you'll hire tutors for your child, or there's always going to be a difference between the weaker students and the top students. But the science of learning is now suggesting that actually math is a very accessible subject to kids. French neurologists did brain scans of scientists like myself, of mathematicians like myself, and they found we use a really primitive part of the brain that has the same sense of space and number that kindergarten kids do.
Oh,
Uh, which wasn't surprising to me because I struggled in math. I don't feel I understand anything unless I can reduce it to a very low level like that, like literally counting, grouping objects. I can teach calculus that way because I had to teach myself that way. So there's evidence that math should be accessible. And this study really confirmed that. What I'm going to show you is a year later, this teacher retested the kids on the same test, but at a grade 6 level. And the results are kind of unbelievable, but they were reported in Scientific American Mind, New York Times. This is what the bell curve looked like a year later. The lowest mark was in the 95th percentile, and the average mark was in the 98th percentile. And then a year later, all the kids wrote the Pythagoras math competition, and all but 3 got awards of distinction. So, and the other 3 actually came close. And there were 4 kids on special education plans and so on. So that's the kind of plasticity that's in kids' brains. Even I'll stop sharing now, but
and how did that happen, John? Was that using your methodology? Is that what led to that improvement?
That's right. Yeah. So the teacher was very into action research. She was a great teacher, but before she adopted JUMP, we have a quote from her where she said that she thought she was teaching one step sometimes conceptually, like just one step, and she realized after reading the JUMP resources, sometimes she was teaching 3 steps at once. She didn't realize how many different things she was teaching at the same time. And so she followed our resources quite carefully for a year. We have lesson plans and slides and student assessments and workbooks, and we don't call them workbooks because we don't want the teachers using that as a lesson. We call them assessment and practice books that are given after the lesson. So she followed JUMP really, really carefully and with real enthusiasm. She was a great teacher to start with, and that's how she produced those results.
So what was the key secret about? I know you've talked to me about how the teaching normally is flat and yours increasing. Can you kind of unparcel this a little bit more?
Yeah, and maybe I wonder if it'd be interesting for your viewers, like if anyone is interested in how even adults learn or how people learn. I might start by asking a question where I would show you 2 methods of teaching something, and you could tell me which you think is the best. Would that make sense?
Sure.
Okay, because that would maybe a little more interactive, and also
I love interactive. That's why we do these things live.
Okay, fantastic.
It'll set up. We're going to do this. I like it.
Yeah, hopefully it'll help you understand what's different about the approach.
Yeah, for sure.
But it has implications way beyond math. It has implications for any field. So I'm going to sorry, I don't want to give you vertigo, but I'll share my screen one more time.
No, it's fine.
So this is a question we ask teachers, and this is based on the science of learning. We say, suppose you had to teach your whole class to play chess. And one method would be to teach the kids the rules of chess, give them a bit of coaching, but just let them play the game. Let them play with their peers, and that's all they do all year is play the game, and they get some coaching and so on from the teacher. And sometimes stronger players might help weaker players and so on. So that's one method of teaching chess. And you might think I want to do that because kids have to play chess. They have to learn to play chess, so the best way is to learn by playing. Does that make sense?
Makes sense, yeah.
And that's a pretty common approach to teaching math now, where you give the kids lots of rich problems, you let them try and solve them, you give them a bit of coaching and so on, and often kids work in groups, so kids would help other kids. So that's one method of teaching chess or math. The other would be to start with mini games with just a few pieces. So I don't know I hope you can see there,
Yes.
that first picture has 2 kings and a castle. And these games have been designed by experts who understand the game deeply to help kids develop what are called mental representations. There's all kinds of research showing that people who have knowledge of their domain do much better at problem solving because they can see the deeper structure of things. Like, so these little mini games have been designed to help you see, oh, this is how a piece moves. These are all the things
Right.
this piece could do. This is a strong position. This is a weak position. You know, don't even bother playing that position. And then as kids master those and have success, you add more and more pieces and you get them up to the full game. Um, and so you might think in the group here, I don't know what people think about which you would choose and why, or which you think would be more efficient and more in line with the science of learning.
So,
Um,
so to either keep the same degree or incrementally increase the level of rigor and
that's right.
complexity.
That's right.
So
Exactly.
from my experience coaching hockey,
Yeah.
um, I think the latter, which is incrementally increasing, I would break down everything we did into the simplest thing,
Yeah.
into small pieces, so the kids learned it and felt confident. Because if you're confident, you're willing to take the next risk. But
Yes.
if you fail when you first step on the ice or try a math question, I guess,
Yeah.
the last thing I want to do is try another math question.
Yeah. You know, that is so interesting, your answer, because for two reasons. First of all, coaches, sports coaches always understand jump math instantly. Like they say, okay, I get it. That makes sense. If you've had any experience coaching, you understand that, right? That you need, and that really captures two things around the science of learning. One is that novice learners, people who are learning something for the first time, are different from expert learners,
Yes,
people who can play the whole game. And so, you know, as a sports coach, that a novice learner has to have things broken down into component skills or concepts. Kids need a lot of practice. You know, they can't, they're not going to absorb these things instantly. And the coach has to be watching and monitoring and assessing constantly and giving tasks where the coach can actually see. You never just talk at the kids and then say, okay, go play the game. You
right.
give them lots of practice and tasks. And the other thing is around confidence. You isolated the, so that's one part of jump, is that we try and follow the science of learning and teach like a coach. The other part is the confidence. You nailed the other thing. Like there's research showing as early as grade 1, kids can tell if a teacher has different expectations for them. You know, anthropologists call humans status-seeking primates.
Right.
If we're good at anything, it's knowing where we are in a pecking order. I don't really believe in innate math ability. There might be some small component, but if we have any innate ability, it's to know where we are in a pecking order. And when we train teachers, we say, well, what would happen to a kid who thinks they're not in the talented group in grade 1? How do they behave? And the teachers say, well, they stop working, they stop paying attention, they start guessing answers, they
Yep.
start misbehaving often to distract the class, you know, and so it becomes a vicious cycle then. So you just in your answer, it was like you set this up as a coach. You kind of isolated the two things that kids need. They need really well structured incremental learning, and they need confidence and positive mindsets. And just playing the full game of chess, it's starting at too high a level, and then the kids start. It has this terrible psychological impact also. Kids start losing confidence, and then they really, their brains stop working. Like it's just a double whammy. They're
Love
being
it.
taught inefficiently, and then and so what you said is really in line with the science
I
that
didn't know
says you
that,
need to.
but I like it.
Yeah, there you go. You just, well, you should go beyond. You should be an advisor or something to the education system, is with your
So many
understanding,
things.
because that's it. You know, you need to scaffold challenges into manageable chunks, and you need to draw. Like when you're building a skill, you have to draw kids' attention to the various parts of the skill, right?
Yep.
And you need lots of review and practice, and then kids get really engaged if you just raise the bar incrementally. If you give them harder and harder problems. And the sad thing is, I don't know why this has happened in math more than any other subject. Over the past 2 decades, people have mistaken that kind of teaching for rote learning. It's not rote. Like we call jump structured inquiry. Even though you're guiding the kids, they're figuring everything out. They're playing the mini games. They're making the discoveries. But you're keeping them in a zone. It's called the 85% zone for optimal learning. You're keeping them in a zone where they actually are just stretching themselves a little, but not too much. And that's really important for adults to know too, that that's the optimal zone for learning anything. You can't push yourself too far outside your comfort zone. It's just not efficient, and you need to practice relentlessly.
Interesting. So let's take this now into sort of what adults can do as well. And let's think about, so how are those that are entering the workforce or and how
Yeah,
can they prepare themselves better for a professional career,
right.
and incorporate math, as you point out how important it is, into their endeavors?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is really understand how your brain works, and there's more and more research on that. There's a book
Interesting.
called Peak by Anders Ericsson. Malcolm Gladwell actually wrote about his work in the book Outliers.
Yes,
So, you know, in Outliers, he talks about how Bill Gates and the Beatles had these
yes,
incredible talents, but they spent a lot of time as children practicing relentlessly. And so Anders Ericsson did these studies that showed that really the most important thing in people reaching elite levels is the amount of practice you get and how efficient your practice is. He found it in some fields like chess, sports, music, where there's money involved. He found that experts have developed more efficient means of practice, probably because there's money involved. And so that's how he actually writes about jump in his book Peak. He said as a form of, he calls it deliberate practice. When you're getting coaching and when you're practicing in an efficient way, he calls that deliberate practice. He singled out jump as an exemplary form of deliberate practice in math. So that's the first thing, is know that you can get better through practice. Don't push yourself outside your zone. And in math, I would add something to that, is go back to where you started having trouble. When I started tutoring, I went back to a grade 6 level and worked my way up to a doctorate. Like if you don't go back to the foundations to where you started struggling, it's highly inefficient.
right.
Um, and then there's one more thing I'll add on memory. I just learned this recently. It's changed. I still do math and I still do research and I still trying to learn new math. And literally learning this one thing from cognitive science has changed the way I'm studying now myself.
Wow.
It's I was at a conference a while ago, and this scientist said that our brains have almost unlimited capacity to remember things, which is really surprising to me because I'm getting older and I'm forgetting everything. But what the scientist said is we have limited capacity to retrieve our memories. That's where the problem lies. So the memories may be there, but we can't get at them. And to retrieve those memories, you have to immediately start practicing the minute you remember something. You need to see it frequently. Um, and you also have to, after a while, you have to see it regularly. So, you know, you might, when I'm learning something new, I think about it a couple times a day. I try and break things into chunks and think about it a few times a day and do that for a week. And then once a week, I think about it, then once a month. And also it helps if you've learned a couple things to interleave them, if you switch back and forth between different topics. Not when you're learning them, because that's inefficient, but once you've learned them, if you force yourself, like the worst way to study is just take a yellow highlighter and underline things as you're reading. Because there's no work involved, you're not jumping around, you're not forcing your brain to build those
Yes.
networks to retrieve stuff. And that's had a miraculous effect. Like I'm remembering things now. I realized I forgot everything I learned at graduate school. It's all gone. But now when I'm learning stuff, I'm actually remembering it, which is really, really amazing. And I just learned that from the science of learning.
Very interesting. So how can we help make a difference? And by the way, I
Hmm.
should mention to our participants, if they have questions, you can put them in the chat, and we'll happily ask John the questions. So how can we help make a difference here?
Well, in general, I think you can help society by investing in math more at any level, like in at math education or upgrading people's math. At Jump Math, we're a charity and we're an interesting kind of entity, and we've won quite a few awards for social entrepreneurship. I think because we're an interesting hybrid. Um, I realized very early when I was building Jump that there were some dangers in just being a purely commercial enterprise, because in education, um, people will pay a lot of money for what they want. And the textbook companies, you know, they're not evil or anything. They just give people what they want. They're very good at that. But for the past 20 years, what people have wanted is not well in line with the science of learning. You know, for the past, you know, that chess analogy I gave you, what people want is play the full game of chess, because that seemed like the most deeply conceptual thing. don't guide kids, don't give them mini games, don't coach them, don't do all that stuff, because that's just not going to produce independent problem solvers. But that's nonsense, that idea. That's the best way to produce independent problem solvers. If you start at too high a level, you never produce independent problem solvers. But unfortunately, only in the past 5 years have people begun to look to the science of learning. It started to happen in reading. People realized kids need phonics. We've known that for 20 years, but only in the past 5 years has the school system been shifting that way. So at Jump, I decided it'd be good to be a charity because we could subsidize experiments, testing, and developing the program. And so we're now at a real tipping point in Canada. The Alberta government, for instance, just licensed Jump for all K to 6 classrooms.
Wow.
We have a full school program. We also have tutoring and other. We have now university upskilling courses, things like that. But our main program is a grade K and soon to be up to grade 9 program that can be used in classrooms. Our biggest need is to create a digital version of that. We're a print publisher, and
Right.
we provide professional learning for teachers, but we have just thousands and thousands of lessons. We have so much intellectual property that's hard to change because it's in a print format. It's hard to create
Right.
online resources for kids. And so a lot of our work is going into creating a digital program. And I think once we have that, we won't have many competitors,
That's kind of
and we'll be in good
that's
shape.
kind of the next frontier. So,
Yeah.
uh, as we think about wrapping up, but I always, I love having entrepreneurs because being an entrepreneur myself, and I, since we met now a couple months ago, I've done some digging around the internet, and I'm fascinated by all the many things you've done, whether it's a TED Talk, and as I said, you said you were an actor. What advice do you have for being a successful entrepreneur? And
Well,
also, this is relevant, I think, to those paying attention, to those listening as investors. You need to look for individuals that have these skills when or have these traits when
that's
you're
right.
thinking about investing. Because I always say, people run companies. Companies don't run themselves. So you want to know if this is a company you want to be involved with or think about investing in. Then you should look at how the business is being run and which individuals are actually making those decisions. So
That's right.
I'm interested in your advice.
Well, first is just look to the science of learning. You can learn anything if you practice properly. And it could take a long time, but if you're patient and so always be open, but not only in yourself, but your employees. When I teach a lesson, I say to the kids, if you don't get it, it's my fault.
Right.
Like I'm responsible for teaching you, and you have to have that idea with your employees too and your staff that if they're not learning or doing something, you as a leader, you can make that happen. If you believe they have the potential, then what's probably happening is they're not being taught well if they're not flourishing. Um, Second, your strengths are also your weaknesses. I learned this over many years. If you're an entrepreneur, you're probably really good at forming partnerships, at wowing people, at getting people excited. But I wasted a lot of time just because I was good at that. I'd form partnerships that went nowhere, just because it's really nice to exercise your talents. So now I'm being much more rigorous in focusing on things that are really high impact and also focusing on things that are drop-in almost. Like we're trying to just perfect Jump now so that any teacher, even if they have even if they're math phobic, could produce the kind of results I showed you. That's all our efforts now are going into just making Jump very, very easy to use for teachers and getting data. Just try and rather than I focus so much in the early years on growth and we grew and we helped a lot of kids. But I think I would have helped even more kids. We're realizing now if we just perfected the program, made it scalable, and then did studies to show beyond a shadow of a doubt. So
That
we've done
works.
two randomized controlled trials now, which is really unusual in education, and those are starting to open doors for us.
Wow.
So those are some pieces of advice, I guess.
Thanks. So what's your next ambition and why?
Well, I would love to. We're trying to set up model schools in Toronto where entire schools are producing the kind of result I showed you, or even close to that, if they even got close to that kind of result, where all the kids are writing math competitions. So that's a huge focus for me now, is just getting it right in a lot of schools. I'm very focused on that, and perfecting our product, like just getting that to a point where we don't have to sell so hard because it just sells itself. That's creating the
That's
digital version of Jump.
that's the pinnacle.
Yeah,
That's the top of the mountain.
yeah.
Um, so again, if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat. From me, I'll wrap it up with my last always favorite questions here. So what's a favorite book, John? And of course, you can give. We're obviously going to say your books, but outside of your books,
Uh, well, I think one of my favorite writers is Chekhov. I love reading his plays. I read them all the time, and his short stories. He's one of the most profoundly insightful authors I've ever encountered. He just understands how people think and live and the kind of tragedies and um, opportunities that are in every moment of a person's life. So I love Chekhov. And I will, if people are interested in knowing more about this, I wrote, and about equity in math and how much potential we're wasting because we don't teach math. I wrote a book called All Things Being Equal, which you could get off
that's the
Amazon.
latest. That's your latest book, actually.
Yeah,
Why math is the key to a better world.
yeah.
We
So if
touched
you're
on
interested,
much of your work in this discussion, I think.
that's right. Yes. Yeah. I mean, the book covers a lot of the things I talked about today, just in more depth, and
Sure.
goes more deeply into some of the things we know about learning now.
So, your favorite breakfast meal and your favorite breakfast restaurant.
Well, I mean, I'm kind of I eat all kinds of foods, but I'm kind of an environmentalist when it comes to my eating because I think our footprint's too big. So I really like Beyond Meat because they use 90% less land, 90% less carbon, and 90% less water than meat-based. And if people substitute even a little bit, it would have a massive impact. So they have incredible breakfast sausages that I like to make with also potatoes and things like that are plant-based. That's probably my favorite breakfast. And I don't really go out for breakfast, so I don't have a. I live in Kensington Market, so if you want to talk about lunch or dinner, there's just dozens and dozens of restaurants in Kensington Market that have such a variety of food.
Favorite lunch
It's,
or dinner? Give me the one your favorite restaurant there in Kensington. For all
well, I
the
think
people from Toronto here or that come to Toronto, they'll know that.
Swatow on Spadina is a really great Chinese food restaurant.
There you go. I know the one.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Been there
fantastic.
a long time.
It's kind of a hole in the wall, but the
Yes.
food's a lot better than it looks. The food is fantastic and very good price.
John, thank you. We're going to jump to it so that we can make the world a better place through math. Thanks, everybody, and
Yeah,
look forward to seeing you again.
thank you so much. It was great talking to you.